Montana Territory, 1889. Clara Whitfield found him on a Thursday morning in late October when she went out to draw the first water of the day from the stone well behind the cabin. She almost didn't see him at all. He was slumped against the far side of the well casing, half hidden by the shadow of the woodpile, one leg stretched out at an angle that told her something in it wasn't right. His hat had rolled a few feet off into the dry grass, and his horse, a rangy sorrel with a white blaze, stood 20 feet away by the fence rail, reins loose, watching her the way an animal watches when it has been standing in one place a long while without knowing what to do next. She set the bucket down slowly. She did not run to him. Her father had taught her, before he'd gone off to the copper mine at Butte and never come back the same, to always look at the whole scene first. Look at the hands, look at the horse. Look at the ground around a man before you look at the man himself. She looked. His right hand was empty and lay open on the dirt beside him. There was no rifle within reach, no pistol drawn. The horse was not lathered. Whatever had happened to him, it had happened somewhere else, and he had ridden here after, and here was where his body had finally quit on him. She crossed the yard. He was breathing. That was the first thing she confirmed. Kneeling beside him in the packed dirt with the cold October air biting at her knuckles. His chest rose and fell shallowly beneath the dark wool of his shirt, and there was blood, dried into a dark crust along his ribs and a fresher trickle at his hairline where his temple had struck stone. His skin under her palm was fever-warm and clammy at the same time, the sign of a man who had lost blood and then sat out in the wind too long trying to get somewhere. She lifted the edge of his shirt carefully and saw the wound in his side, small and neat where the ball had gone in, ugly and torn where it had come out through the back. Clean through. That was mercy of a kind. She had seen worse. She had seen her brother worse, though only for the 12 hours between when they'd brought him home and when he'd died. She sat back on her heels and drew a slow breath. That was when she saw the boots. He had them stretched out in front of him, the way a hurt man does when sitting up hurts less than lying down, and the low autumn sun was hitting the tooled leather of the right one at just the angle that made the pattern jump out at her. She looked at it. Then she looked at the left boot matching. Then she looked back at the right, at the sharp small shape cut into the leather just above the heel, deep and old and rubbed smooth by years of wear but unmistakable. A running wolf above 3 notches. 3 notches for 3 men who'd ridden with him. The wolf for the man himself. She knew that mark. She had known it for 2 years and 4 months. Since the morning she and her mother had ridden out to the Willow Creek line camp and found Ezra face down in the dust with the same mark burned into a piece of harness, leather someone had left beside him, either as a warning or a signature. She had been 18 then. She was 20 now, and she had spent every one of the months since that morning turning that mark over in her mind, wondering when she would see it again and what she would do when she did. She looked at the man on the ground. Her hand had gone very still against the packed dirt beside his hip. His eyes were closed. His breath came in short, careful pulls, the way a man breathes when each breath costs him something. He didn't know she was looking at him. He didn't know what she had just seen. She did the arithmetic quickly the way her father had taught her. He was hurt. She was here. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Havorson, an hour off. The nearest lawman was in Miles City, half a day's ride at hard pace. If she left him against the well, he would be dead by nightfall. If she brought him inside, she would be sleeping under the same roof as a man whose boots bore the mark of the man who had killed her brother. She did not ask herself whether it was wise. She had already decided. The rest was just getting it done. Getting him inside took the better part of an hour. He was tall, taller than her brother had been, and heavier than he looked, and the wound in his side opened again the moment she tried to lift him. She stopped. She thought. She went to the lean-to shed and got the old buffalo hide her father had used for winter drags, and she rolled the man onto it inch by inch, apologizing under her breath every time his body made a sound it shouldn't have. Then she took the hide by its 2 front corners and pulled, slow and steady across the yard, and got him up the 2 steps of the porch by wedging her shoulder under the frame and lifting one end at a time. She put him on the low cot in the front room, near the stove. She got the stove going. She washed her hands twice, once to clean them and once to steady them, and then she cut his shirt away with the sewing shears and got a proper look at what she was dealing with. The wound was worse from the front than from the back. She had been wrong about that. The ball had gone through cleanly, yes, but it had taken a piece of him with it, and the hole in his side had been packed with something, a wad of cloth pushed in hard, likely by his own hand hours ago in the dark somewhere. She pulled it out and he made a sound in his throat, and she talked to him the way her mother had talked to sick calves, low and steady and without meaning, until the sound stopped. She cleaned the wound with the good whiskey her father kept in the cabinet for exactly this kind of morning. She packed it with cotton and boiled linen. She bound it tight. Then she sat back and looked at him. His face was younger than she'd expected. Late 20s maybe. Dark hair pushed back from a forehead that was more freckled than tanned. A mouth that had a hard set to it even in sleep, the way some men's mouths do when they've spent a long time not saying things. She could not tell from his face whether he was the kind of man who wore a running wolf on his boots because he had earned it, or the kind who wore it because he had been given it, or the kind who had taken it off a dead man for reasons she could not yet guess at. She stood up. She went to the door and looked out at the sorrel horse, still by the fence rail, and she went and led it around to the lean-to and unsaddled it and rubbed it down. The saddle was plain, no mark on the leather. She checked every strap, every buckle, every stitch. Nothing, only the boots carried the wolf. She thought about that. A man's saddle is what other men see when he rides past. A man's boots are what he sees when he looks down. Whichever kind of man he was, the mark on him was not a mark he wore to be seen. It was a mark he wore to remind himself of something. She went back inside. She sat in the wooden chair beside the cot with her father's old Winchester across her lap, and she watched him breathe. The stove popped. The wind moved against the north wall of the cabin. Somewhere out past the barn, a coyote called once and got no answer. She waited. He came around near dusk. Not all the way, only far enough to open his eyes and try to make sense of the ceiling above him, which was low and beamed and unfamiliar. Clara saw the moment his awareness caught up to him, the small tightening at the corners of his eyes, the way his right hand moved a half-inch toward his hip and found nothing there. She had taken his belt off when she'd cut his shirt. The gun that had been on it was on the shelf above the stove, out of reach and out of sight. "Don't try to sit up," she said. His eyes moved to her. It took him a moment to focus. When he did not startle. He looked at her, then at the Winchester across her lap, then back at her face, and something in him settled instead of tightened. He had been expecting worse. "Where?" he said. The word came out cracked. She got up and brought him a tin cup of water, holding it to his mouth carefully so he could drink without lifting his head. He drank about half of it and then closed his eyes again. "Whitfield Place," she said, "north of the Bull Mountain Road. I found you by the well this morning. How long?" "Most of the day. It's near sundown now." He was quiet a long moment. She thought he had gone under again, but then his eyes opened and found her once more, and she saw him trying to put together the pieces of how he had gotten from wherever he had been to where he was now. He did not seem to have all of them. "Bullets through," she said. "Clean. You lost a lot of blood and you rode too long after. I cleaned it and packed it. If you keep still and the fever doesn't come up, you'll live." "Obliged. Don't be yet." His mouth moved at that, not quite a smile. She was struck unwillingly by how tired the expression looked. Not the tiredness of a hard day. The tiredness of a man who had been tired for years and had stopped noticing. "Name," she said. He hesitated. She saw it. It was only a half-second, but she saw it, and she filed it away with everything else she had been filing since morning. "Micah," he said. "Micah Doyle, Clara Whitfield." He nodded once, very slightly, as if a proper nod would cost him more than he had to spend. His eyes closed again. She watched him a while longer, and when she was sure he had gone back under, she stood and went to the shelf above the stove and took down his gun belt and looked at it properly for the first time. It was a plain rig, worn dark at the buckle from years of use. The pistol was a Colt, well kept, the grip smooth from a right-handed draw. She turned the belt over in her hands. On the inside of the leather, near where it would sit against a man's hip, someone had scratched a small mark into the underside with a knife point. Not tooled, scratched. Quick and rough, the way you mark a thing when you don't want it seen but you want to know it's there. A running wolf, above 3 notches. She set the belt back on the shelf, very carefully, so it made no sound. Then she went to the window and stood a long while, looking out at the darkening yard, thinking about the name Micah Doyle and about which parts of it, if any, were true. The fever came up in the night. She had known it would. She sat beside the cot with a basin of well water and a folded square of muslin, and she wiped his face and his neck and the inside of his wrists, and she listened to him talk to people who weren't there. Most of it was nothing she could make sense of. A name, Sam, said twice with something that sounded like an apology behind it. A stretch of counting, low and even, from 1 to 7, and then starting over. Once near 2 in the morning, he said clearly and without any confusion at all, "I told him not to." She stopped wiping his forehead and looked at him. His eyes were closed. His mouth had gone slack again. Whatever he had told whoever he had told it to, he was not going to say it a second time. She thought about Ezra. She could not help it. Ezra had been 19 when they found him, 3 years younger than her at the time, and he had been the kind of younger brother who followed a person around the yard asking questions until you wanted to swat him, and then, an hour later, made you laugh so hard you forgot you'd ever wanted to. He had ridden out to Willow Creek to move the small herd her father kept there down to the home pasture before the first hard freeze. He had ridden out alone because their father was in Butte by then and their mother was already sick and Clara had been the one holding the place together. She had told him to take the rifle. He had taken it. It had not helped him. They had told her afterward that it was likely rustlers. That there had been trouble that fall with a small outfit working the country between the Musselshell and the Yellowstone, men who took a few head at a time from places too far out to notice quickly, and who did not leave witnesses when a witness turned up. The sheriff at Miles City had said the mark on the harness leather was known to him. A running wolf above 3 notches. He had said the name that went with it, a name Clara had turned over in her mind so many times since that the shape of it had gone smooth, the way a stone goes smooth in a creek bed. Rennick, Bailey Rennick. The sheriff had said he would look into it. He had, in his way. Nothing had come of it. Rennick and the men who rode with him had moved on out of the county before winter, and the sheriff had gone to a wedding in Bozeman, and Clara's mother had died in February, and by the time the ground was soft enough to bury her beside Ezra, Clara had understood that no one was going to do this thing for her, and that if it was going to be done, she would be the one to do it. She had not known, yet, how. She had only known that she would recognize the mark when she saw it again. She looked at the man on the cot. His breathing had evened out some. The fever was still up, but it was not climbing the way it had been an hour ago. He would live through the night. She had been careful with the wound and lucky with the man, and he was not going to die under her roof. She dipped the muslin in the basin and wrung it out and laid it across his forehead again. Then she went and took his gun belt down from the shelf and sat with it in her lap in the wooden chair and waited for morning. He was clearer by dawn. Weak, but clearer. Clara had put the gun belt back on the shelf before first light, and she had built the stove up, and she had made a pot of coffee and a thin broth from the bone stock she kept in the crock. When his eyes opened, she was sitting at the table with a cup in her hand, watching him the way she might have watched a snake she had decided not to kill yet. "Morning," she said. "Morning." His voice was better, not good, better. "Can you sit?" "I can try." She helped him. She put an arm under his shoulders and eased him up against the folded blanket she had set at the head of the cot, and she saw him go gray around the mouth and stay gray for the better part of a minute before the color came back. She brought him the broth. He held the cup himself, both hands, and drank it slowly. "You're a careful nurse," he said when the cup was empty. "I'm a careful everything. I noticed." She took the cup back and set it on the table. She sat down in the wooden chair and looked at him, and he looked at her, and there was a stretch of quiet between them that neither of them tried to fill. She had decided sometime in the small hours that she was not going to ask him about the boots. Not today. A man who was asked a hard question while he was still weak enough to lie badly might give her a fast lie, and a fast lie would tell her nothing she could use. She wanted the slow answer, the one that came out when he thought he was safe. "Where were you headed?" she asked instead. "West. That's a direction, not a place." Wasn't sure yet on the place. "Where were you coming from?" He looked at her a moment before he answered. "Miles City. That's a day and a half of hard riding." "I know. You were shot before you left it, or after?" "After, about 6 hours out." "By who?" "A man who didn't like being followed." She let that sit. It was a real answer, or the shape of one, and she noted the way he had given it, plain and short, without any of the small elaborations men use when they are building a story on the ground as they walk. Either he was telling something close to the truth, or he was a much better liar than most. "You a lawman?" she asked. Something moved across his face at that. Not quite a smile, not quite the opposite. "No. Bounty." "No." "Then what?" He was quiet a while. She watched him weigh whether to answer, and she watched him decide, and she watched the deciding cost him something small. "I was riding with a man," he said, "for about 4 years. I stopped riding with him about a month ago. He didn't take it kindly. I've been trying to put country between us since." "He shot you." "One of his did, same thing." "This man have a name." "Everybody has a name." "He got one, you'll say." Micah Doyle, if that was his name, looked at her a long moment across the small, dim room. The stove ticked. Outside, a horse moved against the fence. "Not today," he said. She nodded once and got up to take the empty cup to the wash basin, and she did not let him see her face while she did it. He slept most of the day. She let him. She went out and did the yard chores she had been putting off since morning, and she brought in an armload of stove wood, and she took his sorrel out of the lean-to and turned it into the small paddock behind the barn, where her own 2 horses stood watching it with mild interest. The sorrel was a good animal. Sound legs, deep chest, a habit of standing quiet when tied. Whoever Micah Doyle had been in the country he had come from, he had known enough to keep a horse like this one well. She went through his saddlebags. She did it standing at the workbench in the lean-to with the door open so she would hear him if he called, and she did it slowly and put every item back where it had been. A tin of matches, a folded oilcloth, a packet of jerked beef half gone, a small book cloth-bound, its spine cracked from being carried in a bag too long. She opened it. It was a testament, plain and cheap, the kind a mother gives a boy when he leaves home. There was a name written on the inside of the front cover in a woman's hand. Micah S. Doyle, from his mother, Christmas 1876. He would have been a child then, 12, maybe 13. The book had been carried a long time. She put it back. She did not know what to do with the small softness the book had put in her chest, so she set it aside and kept looking. In the second bag she found a folded piece of paper, creased so many times the creases had gone furry. She opened it carefully. It was a wanted poster, not for him. Bailey Renick, wanted for cattle theft, horse theft, and the murder of a deputy marshal in Custer County, Montana Territory. $400 reward, dead or alive. Apply Sheriff's Office, Miles City. Beneath the printed text, in the same rough hand that had scratched the wolf into the underside of the gun belt, someone had added a line of writing. Last seen headed west, Musselshell Country, 2nd week of October. Rode with 4. 1 killed at Sand Creek. Clara stood very still in the lean-to with the paper in her hand, and the smell of horses and old leather around her, and the light coming in slantwise through the boards, and she thought about the count she had heard in the night. 1 to 7 and starting over. She thought about the name Sam, said twice with something like an apology behind it. She thought about the mark scratched inside the belt where only the man wearing it would ever see it. She folded the paper along its creases, exactly as she had found it, and put it back in the bag. She put the bag back on the shelf. She walked out of the lean-to and across the yard and stood for a while at the fence looking east toward the low brown hills, where the wind was coming down off the ridges and moving the last of the season's dry grass in long, slow waves. She thought about her brother. She thought about the sheriff at Miles City who had gone to a wedding in Bozeman. She thought about the 2 years and 4 months she had spent turning a name over in her mind until the shape of it went smooth. She thought about a man on a cot inside her cabin who had ridden with that name for 4 years and had, 1 month ago, decided not to ride with it anymore. Then she went back inside to see if he was awake. He was awake. He had pulled himself up a little more against the folded blanket, and he was looking at the ceiling in the way of a man who has been looking at it long enough to know each knot and each nail, and he turned his head when she came in. "You went through my bags," he said. She stopped in the doorway. She had not expected him to know. She thought about lying and decided against it inside the same breath. "I did. Find what you were looking for. Some of it." He nodded slowly. He did not seem angry. He seemed like a man who had been expecting it and was almost relieved to have it done with. "I'd have done the same," he said. She crossed the room and sat down in the wooden chair. She did not pick up the Winchester this time. It was leaning against the wall where she had left it, close enough to reach, but she did not put her hand on it. That would have been a question, and she had a different question to ask. "Rennick," she said. His eyes closed for a moment. When they opened again, they were steady on hers. "Rennick," he said, "you rode with him 4 years." "I did." "You stopped a month ago." "I did." "Why?" He was quiet a long while, long enough that she thought he might not answer, and she prepared herself to sit with that and wait him out. But he did answer, and when he did, his voice was flatter than it had been before, the way a voice goes when a man is telling a thing he has told to no one else. "There was a boy," he said, "about 16, working a small place on the Powder River with his mother and his sister. We took a dozen head from their pasture in September. He came after us. He caught up to us at a creek crossing about 20 miles south. He had a rifle and he didn't know how to use it. Bailey shot him off his horse before the boy got a word out." He looked at the ceiling again. "The boy had a letter in his coat, to a girl in Deadwood he was fixing to send for. I read it after. Bailey wanted the coat. I took the letter first and put it in my saddlebag, and I didn't tell him. I never sent it. I didn't know her name, only her first name. Ellie. I've been carrying that letter around for a month like it's going to tell me what to do with it." Clara sat very still. "I stopped riding with him the next morning," Micah said. "I didn't make a speech about it. I saddled up before light and I rode. He sent 2 men after me. I lost one at Sand Creek. The other one caught up to me 6 hours out of Miles City and put a ball through my side before I put one through his. That's how I ended up at your well." She did not speak. She could not for a moment. She was thinking about a boy on the Powder River and about her brother on the Willow Creek line and about the arithmetic she had done sitting beside a well the morning before. "Why did you stop?" she asked finally. Her voice was quieter than she meant it to be. Micah looked at her. "Because I was tired," he said, "of being the kind of man who was there when it happened." She did not answer him right away. She sat with what he had said, and with the way he had said it, and with the fact that his eyes had not slid off hers while he said it, and she measured all of it against the 2 years and 4 months she had spent turning a name over in her mind. Then she got up and went to the shelf above the stove and took down the small wooden box her mother had kept there for as long as Clara could remember. Inside it was a folded square of oiled paper, and inside the paper was a piece of harness leather about the size of her palm, cut and burned along one edge where someone had scored a mark into it with a hot iron. She brought it back to the chair and sat down and held it out to him. "You know this mark," she said. He took it. His hand was steady enough now to hold it flat. He looked at it a long moment. "I know it. 2 years and 4 months ago, my brother went out to move a small herd off our line camp at Willow Creek. He was 19. He went alone because there wasn't anyone else to send. Someone shot him off his horse for 11 head of cattle and left this piece of harness on his chest. The sheriff at Miles City knew the mark. He said the name to me. He said he would look into it. He didn't." Micah looked at the piece of leather in his hand. He did not look up at her. "His name was Ezra," she said. "He was the kind of boy who asked questions until you wanted to swat him." Micah closed his eyes. "I remember Willow Creek," he said. "I wasn't there. Bailey took 2 men and left me at the camp with the horses. He came back the next morning with 11 head and a piece of harness leather missing off one of the pack rigs. I asked him where he'd got the cattle. He told me not to ask him that anymore." He opened his eyes. He looked at her. "I asked twice more that year. He told me the same thing both times. By the 3rd time I had stopped asking because I already knew, and asking was going to make me say it out loud." He held the piece of leather out to her. She did not take it. "Keep it a minute," she said. He kept it. He held it in his open palm on top of the blanket, and neither of them spoke for a while. Outside, the afternoon light had gone the color it goes late in October, thin and yellow, and it came through the small window over the wash basin and fell across the foot of the cot. "I could have shot you at the well," she said. "I know. I thought about it, not for long enough. I'd have thought about it too in your place. I brought you inside instead. I know. I want you to tell me why I did that." He looked at her a long time before he answered. She had the sense that he was picking through several possible answers and setting each one aside before he found the one he was willing to say. "Because a person can carry a grief a long time," he said, "and know the whole while that if the day ever comes to set it down, they're going to want to set it down and not throw it." She took the piece of harness leather back. She folded it into the oiled paper. She put it in the box on the shelf and closed the lid. He mended slowly. The wound in his side wanted to weep for a few days more, and the fever came back once, not as bad as the first time, and by the end of the second week he could stand at the stove long enough to pour his own coffee, and by the end of the third he could walk out to the paddock and back without stopping halfway to lean on the fence rail. Clara watched him do it from the porch and did not offer him an arm. He had told her in one of the quieter afternoons that a man who was healing needed to feel each step cost him something or he wouldn't know when he was well. She had thought about that a long while after he'd said it. She had thought it was true of more than just healing. They did not speak of Bailey Rennick often. They did not need to. The name sat in the corner of the room the way a lantern sits on a shelf, present and unlit, and both of them knew it was there and neither of them reached for it. What they spoke of instead was the yard, and the horses, and the small daily arithmetic of a place run by one person that was now being run by 1.5. Micah could not lift a full pail of water yet, but he could split kindling one-handed, and he could sit at the table in the evenings and mend a bridle strap while she worked on the ledger her father had left 3 years untouched. She had started keeping it again in September. She was not sure yet what she was keeping it for. One evening near the end of the third week, he set down the bridle strap and looked at her across the table. "There's a marshal in Miles City," he said. "New one, came in last spring out of the Dakotas. He's not the man who was there when your brother was killed. I know, I've heard his name. He knows about Rennick. He's been building a case for the deputy who was killed at Rosebud. He doesn't have enough yet. And you do. I have 4 years of it." She set the pen down. She looked at him a long moment. "You'd hang for some of it. I'd hang for a piece of it, not all." "Which piece?" "The pieces I was there for and didn't stop." She was quiet. He was quiet. The stove ticked between them. "I'd rather hang for what I did," he said, "than keep walking around alive and knowing what I know and doing nothing with it. I've been thinking about it since Sand Creek. I've been thinking about it harder since I woke up on your cot. You could ride west," she said. "You could put a mountain range between yourself and any of it. Nobody would come after you but him, and he'd give up eventually. He wouldn't give up. He might. He wouldn't, and even if he did, I would still know what I know." She picked up the pen again. She did not write with it. She held it and looked at the ledger without seeing the ledger, and she thought about her brother and about the boy on the Powder River and about a girl in Deadwood named Ellie who was never going to know why the letter had not come. "When you go to Miles City," she said, "I want to ride with you." He looked at her. "That's not a good idea," he said. "I didn't ask you if it was." He looked at her a while longer. Then he nodded once, the way he had nodded that first evening from the cot, and he picked up the bridle strap again. They rode for Miles City on a clear morning in the second week of November, with the first hard frost still glittering in the shadowed places along the fence line. Micah rode the sorrel. Clara rode her father's bay. She had put the piece of harness leather in her coat pocket, wrapped in its old paper, and she carried the wanted poster folded inside her father's Old Testament in the saddlebag behind her. Micah carried a written account of 4 years, done out in his own hand over 3 evenings at her kitchen table, each page signed and dated at the bottom. He had not asked her to read it. She had not asked to. That was between him and the marshal and whatever came after. The marshal was a lean man in his 40s named Halloran, with gray at his temples and the careful stillness of someone who had learned early not to move faster than he needed to. He listened to Micah talk for the better part of 2 hours without interrupting once. When Micah was done, Halloran read the pages through, and then he read them through again, and then he set them down on the desk between them and looked at Clara. "You're Ezra Whitfield's sister." "I am. I remember the case. I remember you weren't the one on it." "I wasn't. I'd have done it different." He looked at Micah. "You understand you're going to sit in a cell tonight." "I understand." "You understand a judge is going to decide what part of this you answer for." "I understand." "You understand I can't promise you anything." "I'm not asking for anything." Halloran nodded once and stood up and called for the deputy at the front. Clara stood too. She had thought on the ride in that she would know what to say at this moment, and she found that she did not, and she thought that was probably right. Some moments do not want words laid over them. Micah looked at her across the desk. He did not reach for her hand. She did not reach for his. It was not that kind of thing between them and had not been. It was the other kind, the kind where two people had stood in the same weather and had chosen, without saying it, to keep standing. "Come see me," he said, "if they let you." "I'll come." He went with the deputy. She watched the door close behind him. Halloran waited until the sound of the boots had gone down the hall before he spoke. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "this is going to take a while. Rennick's going to run when he hears, and I'm going to have to catch him, and I'm going to need what your friend wrote to hold up in front of a judge. It's going to be months. It may be a year. I know. Your brother's going to get his day. So is the deputy at Rosebud. So is the boy on the powder. I want you to know that. Thank you." She rode back to the Whitfield place alone that afternoon, with the low sun ahead of her and the wind at her back, and she thought about a Thursday morning at a stone well, and about the arithmetic she had done kneeling in the dirt. He was hurt. She was there. She thought about a mark on a pair of boots that had told her one story, and about a man who had, over 3 weeks at her kitchen table, told her a different one. Both stories had been true. That was the part she was still learning. The trees along the creek were bare. The frost had gone from the fence line. The bay walked steady beneath her, and she rode home. Clara Whitfield found a wounded rancher by her well on a Thursday morning in October and helped him because the arithmetic was simple. He was hurt. She was there. What followed was not simple at all. A man named Micah Doyle had spent 4 years riding with the wrong man and 1 month riding away from him, and he had come to a stone well in southern Montana with a bullet in his side and a testament in his saddlebag, and a boy's unsent letter folded next to it. A woman named Clara Whitfield had spent 2 years and 4 months turning a name over in her mind, and had learned, in 3 weeks at her own kitchen table, that the person who could tell her the truth of a thing was not always the person she had been waiting to punish. Neither of them mended what had been broken. They only rode into Miles City together on a bright, cold morning and set what they had in front of a man who would carry it the rest of the way. Sometimes that is all a person can do. Sometimes that is enough. May God bless each and every one of you who listen today. Until next time, keep riding.